our inspiration for all the work we do is Caleb Gattegno's stuff. Perhaps we should, having said that Gattegno discovered what we think is very reliable evidence or reliable picture of how people learn, we should perhaps talk about some of the distinctive things about what he did discover and how he did conceive of his own learning. But it seemed to me Gattegno was born in 1911 in Egypt. He was born in not Cairo. Where was he born? Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And he, as a young man, he founded a school. He taught in Egypt, and then he came to the UK after the war, and he worked in France and Switzerland, and he lived the last part of his life in the States. But it always seemed to me one of the very significant things about Gattegno was that he was a very successful teacher and teacher trainer and developer of materials across a range of disciplines. He wasn't just a subject specialist who was an expert in maths teaching. Somehow he managed to make fundamental contributions to the teaching of mathematics, to the teaching of foreign languages, to teaching of literacy, reading and writing. And so there must be something more than just an insight into one particular discipline that he had. And this science of education, which is what he called it himself, his understanding about how people learn and therefore the implications for teaching, is clearly something that underpins him being a very successful teacher across different disciplines. And that seems to me a huge endorsement and reason for us to take Gattegno very seriously.
Yes, yes.
Ros, would you like to say anything else about Gattegno?
Yes, and not only that, if we take his contribution to teaching languages, he developed the materials that he developed, which we might get to at some point, although that's not the subject of today, but he did this for a great number of languages. We're talking about 40 languages. And the materials still exist for quite a few of these languages, and they're available still. And so we're not talking about somebody either who was a specialist in teaching English or a specialist in teaching French. He could take any language, and some of the languages were quite extraordinary. For example, the original language of Tahiti, the original language of Hawaii. He worked on Lakota, which is the language of the Indians of Dakota. And so, and as well, he worked on, for example, the European languages, Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Japanese, all of which have different writing systems. So we're talking about somebody who was really, who covered the whole area of education in quite an extraordinary way. And so that his contribution is really worth looking at. Yes, definitely.
And Ros has just described all his language abilities and his language talents. It has to be said he's best known for his work in mathematics, not in languages. I mean,
well, it depends where you are, Piers, right?
Depending where you are.
In France, he's best known for literacy and for languages, and hardly at all for mathematics.
All right. Okay.
In Britain, he founded. He was one of the co-founders of ATM, for example. That's your side. Off you go.
All right, but anyway, just to say that he was the person who popularized the use of Cuisenaire rods around the world, and really was the pioneer in terms of using. I forget what they're called technically in mathematics, but anyway, manipulables, the idea of making mathematics concrete and something that people can experience rather than just seeing up on a blackboard. Now that was Gattegno, and that was where he made his name, certainly in Britain in the 50s and 60s, and around the world as well. So, what an extraordinary breadth. But underpinning all this was his deep insights into how he himself learned, how he was seeing learning in front of him, and then he started teaching on that basis. And that was, I'm sure, the secret of his success.
So I think what we hear a lot right now about making learning inquiry based and conceptual and more visible, it's something that he was already doing more than 50 years ago, right? So it's interesting how things that look modern are actually just
70 years old. The world is catching up. Gattegno was very far ahead of his time, and now the world is catching up at this point, I think. Singapore maths is basically Gattegno maths, for example.